So I'm Sandy Scheller, and this is my 5th year of doing art from the Holocaust. I got into doing art from the Holocaust and in the Holocaust and during the Holocaust because my mother, who was a Holocaust survivor, wanted to come to Comic-Con. If Stan Lee could do it, she could do it. She did it in a wheelchair. And so, Heidi was gracious enough to honor my mom, and I just want you to know that our panels are in the Holocaust and during the Holocaust are on YouTube, so you can see what we're talking about. Now, you probably noticed that there's a name missing, Stephen Smith. Stephen called me this morning. He's normally my moderator, and for your safety, he came down with, not with COVID, but tested, and he didn't want to do anything to you. So, Stephen, this one's for you as well as all of you out there. Talk a little bit about propaganda. I know what you're all thinking. You're saying, where's the surprise? Where's the surprise?
I don't know where.
Yeah, we don't know where the surprise is. Wait till you find out who the surprise is. You're going to love this one. So let's talk about that Aryan. Let's talk about Nazi propaganda. Who is blonde hair and blonde hair, blue eyes, and beautifully shaped? Well, it isn't Adolf Hitler, is it? No, it is not. So when they were doing these kinds of things, and some of you who've been to my panels before, you might be saying, well, it's a little bit of a repeat there. Yeah, it is. But the bottom line is that it's the German blood. It's that German blood. And for those of you who are in San Diego, I don't know if you know, but at the Chula Vista Public Library, I have an exhibit called Remember Us, the Holocaust. And if you think of those letters, Remember Us, the Holocaust. It spells R-U-T-H. It's open during library hours, and you can see what the stories of 13 Holocaust survivors are, and it's free. So I've done everything that I've tried to do to bring together Holocaust awareness, and one great place to do it is here at Comic-Con. Now let's talk about the eternal Jew. Okay, I'm Jewish. Do I look like that? No. So for somebody to portray Jewish people like this, there's a real problem. And what about this children's book called The Poisonous Mushroom? Der Giftpilz. Der Giftpilz. So we're going to teach you a word today. Gift, as far as what we're doing here. The poisonous mushroom. So imagine that you are in your school class, and all of a sudden, this is in your children's book. Daddy, someday when I have my own farm, no Jew will ever enter my house. Is this fair? Well, this was what was rotated in the schools. By the way, having a Holocaust exhibit, do you know what it's like when students come into the room and you say, so tell me what you know about the Holocaust, and they go like this. I'm serious. Yeah. So that's why we're here. That's why we're here. I'd like to start out with a very, very dear, wonderful colleague of mine from the USC Shoah Foundation. We're both interviewers, and just a wonderful person. And I feel like we can bounce ideas off each other, and we grow. It truly is the definition of 1 + 1 = 1,000, Heidi. So I'm going to start with Heidi. I'm ready.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Comic-Con, for hosting this and for seeing the importance of Holocaust education and the importance that comics played during the Holocaust, and to this great panel. What an esteemed panel. Well, I'm going to introduce you now to Mickey O'Captagour. What you're looking at is one of, that we've discovered, if not the very first comic book created during the Holocaust, right in the Holocaust. It was created by a Jewish gentleman named Horst Rosenthal. Horst Rosenthal was born in Breslau, Germany in 1915, and he left when the Nazi Party came to power in 1933. He moved to Paris, as many thinkers and artists did, for the freedoms that France allowed their citizens, their residents. But then when the Nazis entered France in 1940, he was arrested. He was a foreign-born Jew, and that was really the first round that they arrested, and they put him in the camp called Gours in the Vichy, southern part of France, in the camp. I want you to know, art in general, in ghettos and in camps, was a lifeline for many people. Sometimes it allowed them to get in touch with their humanity. In other cases, it was used as barter and trade for food. Maybe they could trade it on the outside for a meal. And in the case of Horst Rosenthal, well, we don't know exactly why he produced this piece. We know he wanted to document. He needed to document what he saw, if not for the future when they were liberated, so that the world could see what happened. So he documented this, and on the bottom, I want you to see what he wrote on Publié sans autorisation de Walt Disney. He did not bother to get copyright authorization. Infringement of copyright law really wasn't so important when human rights violations on the inside were happening. So he utilized sarcasm. He imbued Mickey Mouse, this lovable character, with lots of irony and sarcasm, very powerful when you need to tell the truth, when you need to show what you want to show, but it just defies realism. So he used the fantastic to do so. The words before Ocampo don't know what it stands for. I think if we looked at the Roman numerals, it's about 567.
When you looked that up, yeah, it was like 567.
No idea what Rosenthal did, if it was a cataloger or what it was, but we know right on the cover, not interested in copyright, but he did have access to pen, he had access to watercolor, but what he didn't have access to was a lot of food. Gours was just a horrible place. And we're talking 1940 to 42. This is signed in 42. He had access to watercolor, but they had no food, not enough food. They didn't have enough water. They didn't have enough clothing. Dysentery was rampant. Typhoid disease. Of the 18,000 Jews and others imprisoned there over 3 years, over 1,100 of them perished for these very reasons. Now, utilizing sarcasm just with a plum, we have Rosenthal. This is extraordinary. He juxtaposed an actual artifact, a black and white aerial of the Camp de Gours, and the fantasy of Mickey Mouse adjacent. And Mickey is saying, Gours, I don't like what I see. What is this place? It looks like dog houses, lines, and people are doing all kinds of things outside of this camp. I'm out of here. I do not like it. And what's really, so you make no mistake, this is very real with that artifact. We don't know how he got that artifact, but we know that the Swiss Red Cross was operating inside of the camps. We know that they were trading artworks. Probably how this survived was a little trade, but we don't know that. And Mouse 2, 40 years later, was doing the same thing, using the graphic novel, and he has an actual picture of his father Claude. But he does make note of Rosenthal and Mickey Ocampo de Gours in Meta Mouse, a later publication, Spiegelman.
Here comes my favorite slide.
Oh, papier! So Mickey Mouse is now it's going to about to be arrested, and the gendarme says, I need your papers. You know how the Nazis were, and their collaborators. This is Vichy France now. They're very detail-oriented. They needed the paperwork. Where? Papers. I don't have any papers. This is Mickey. What is your name? Mickey. Who is your father? Walt Disney. What's the name of your mother? I don't have a mother. What do you mean you don't have a mother? Everyone's got a mother. You are screwing with me. Are you a Jew? Oh, you're Jewish. He says, oh, pardon me, but I don't know what you mean by that. Which is the bubble there with the question mark. He said, where are you from? He said, I was born in America, but I'm international. Because Mickey Mouse was very famous all throughout Europe, not just in the US. He said, oh, you are a Jew, and he arrested. But I want you to notice the composition. Rosenthal draws the image box, but look at the tail, just a portion. because Mickey Mouse is just a fiction. And this is Rosenthal in the first person as narrator, speaking through Mickey Mouse. Mickey, though, has options. He can leave at any point, because his tail is not fully in the composition. Brilliant. It's a fiction aware of itself as a fiction.
Well, this is Alex's favorite slide.
Because he's hungry.
Yeah.
Well, Mickey Mouse, in Rosenthal being sarcastic, being brilliant, has Mickey whipping out a magnifying glass, looking at the food is just so small, the portion. And we know that the shortage of food would make it very difficult when the food should arrive, and as it did in the verbiage, it says everyone rushes to the corner of the barracks to divvy up the food, and everyone is watching them cutting the food as if it were inequitable. God forbid someone should get more, or we should weigh it. And Mickey, at the end, gets a smaller portion. And we know what humanity might do to one another in a situation like that. So it didn't make for a lot of solidarity. The regime was just brutal. They got you on the inside and they got you on the outside. Horrible. Now we're going to pivot out of Horst Rosenthal for one moment. I'm going to show you from Karl Schweitzer, who was also in the camp. He was not a Jew, but he was an artist and satire galore here. You know, when France emancipated its Jews after the French Revolution, their slogan, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, was adopted. Well, they were still using this slogan under the Nazi rule, which is BS, because as Schweitzer shows you in his the irony of liberté, liberty behind barbed wires and wars. Égalité, not so much equality there, behind barbed wires, separating the mother and the father and the child, and fraternité of the French gentleman getting kicked in the back the Jewish gentleman getting kicked in the back by the French boot. And avion de guerre on the right, there was airmail. There was a little back and forth of mail in that camp in Vichy, France. And I see a Jewish gentleman with wings, and I'm just going to assume it's kind of an ascension, or after death an ascension, just my own take. Thank you. Last slide from Rosenthal. See the tail? He has options. He can escape this hell if he wishes. In fact, he says, I have had enough of the air of the Pyrenees. And Vichy, France, war was near the Pyrenees Mountains. I think I'm going to take an eraser and just erase myself right out of this situation. And in a total rebuke to the government, to the Vichy government, if the gendarmes want to find me, they can find me in the land of égalité, liberté, fraternité. Je parle Amérique, I speak American. Well, we all know America was not so liberté, okay? It was tight shut like a drum in 42. Long story short, Rosenthal, he creates this in 42. He ends up on Transport 31 through Drancy. His name got on the list. He was arrested and he lands in Auschwitz on September 11th, 42. He had a paralyzed left arm. And he was murdered on the day of his arrival. So Mickey, unfortunately, did not get to erase himself out of this. Same time, please.
Yeah.
Our government had adopted Mickey as a spokesman or national representative for the war effort since 41. He was on war bonds, he was on, every poster. He's even in the left bottom there. Our Allied forces drew him on the side of the plane saying, we're going to foreclose on you. To France, to Europe, to Nazi Germany. Oh, thank you. Oh, Mickey Mouse. Yeah, baby. I've already got him. But, Walt Disney Studios even put most of their muscle behind the war effort and lent the whole studios into Führer's face. At the top, it was an anti-Nazi propaganda film starring, at the bottom, Donald Duck, enforced a lot of labor. And one fun fact that I'll leave you with is that our Allied forces' code word when they landed on the beaches of Normandy was Mickey Mouse. Thank you.
Well, let's talk about Man's Search for Meaning. How many hands here have read Man's Search for Meaning, and Viktor Frankl. His grandson's sitting next to me right now. Yeah, so surprise, surprise. History and his story. Very interesting how Alex and I met. Alex, I'm going to go ahead and let you talk, and then I'm going to interrupt you.
There we go. Hi. Well, it's really an honor to be here, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being here. So some of you read, as it's always said, the book. He wrote a lot of books, but this was a book that the book he's most known for because it was his personal account of his experiences in the Holocaust. Now, my grandfather was a psychiatrist. When you asked him, what do you do? He said, I'm a doctor, that's all. And he took his profession very seriously in that he saw that as a doctor, you're responsible for not just fixing whatever physical needs somebody has, but also their emotional and also their, I want to say spiritual. He used a different word, noetic. In German you have different words for spiritual. One has a religious connotation and the other does not. The other just means who you are as a person on an existential level. And he was the first to recognize that and to respect that about human beings and to put that in the center of his approach to healing. He had learned from Sigmund Freud and from Alfred Adler, but at some point said, I'm tired of this. It's all reductionistic, kind of reducing us to drives and instincts and reaction formations. And I think that as human beings, we're always, even if we're limited or if we're challenged, we are always free to decide who we want to be and how we want to act in this world. And he could prove that. He would see that with people who were going through difficult times. And later on, when he was put in a concentration camp, he said, you can take away everything from me, but not this decision of how I'm going to react to this situation, what I'm going to do in this situation. This freedom we always have, and it's an approach to healing that has since been adopted by other approaches to therapy, and I happen to be a therapist and be working with that too. And so, well, here we are.
Do we want to show the video, or we want to talk about the next slide?
Well, we can. Yeah,
let's do it.
Yeah. So
let's do it.
Speaking about humanity, and he always spoke of
So
how
he always did caricatures, and he knew that one of the things that he lived, but he also included that in his therapy, and he was maybe the first to include that as a therapeutic value, the role of humor and how it helps us as human beings with our capacity to distance ourselves from our own selves and from our own situation, and how this distance can be a very healthy thing, especially in a situation of distress. And this is particularly significant because you see on the back, or rather the front of this was a piece of a recipe paper slip. And so this has his name on it. And his name was Viktor Emil Frankl, but now it's Viktor Israel Frankl. So that was already under the Nazi occupation, or Austria was already part of Nazi Germany. And he was not allowed to call himself a doctor anymore, which he was. He was a neurologist. If you ask him, he always said, I'm just a doctor. So he was now a Fachbehandler, which means, a specialist for problems of the nervous system, or of the mind, of the brain. Dr. Viktor Israel Frankl, to kind of make sure that everybody knows that he's Jewish. And there you see he was head of the Rothschild Hospital, which was a position he was assigned to. It was an exclusively Jewish hospital, so he could only treat Jewish patients there. Amazing stories, actually, of how he helped to get people out who were doomed because their diagnosis was schizophrenia, which was a death sentence under the Nazis because they had no tolerance for mental disease. That was a ticket, to be exterminated. So he forged some diagnoses there, but that's a story for another day. There you see, zur ärztlichen Behandlung für Juden, so may only perform with Jews. So this was the time. This was 1941, and then on the back you see his best friend Paul Pollack. And so he obviously had just become a father, and he was a very dry, he was a very serious man. And this was kind of probably a situation that happened that way. He had just become a dad, and his wife, I think it's his wife, is holding up the baby, and he says, "No, songs. What are you saying to that, Mr. Papa?" And he says, "Well, actually, it kind of looks like my wife, but somehow it actually also looks like me." So completely devoid of humor, and I can imagine my grandfather getting a kick out of that, and that, you know, it's kind of a funny, abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation, maybe.
Pretty amazing, huh? So here's a good slide if you guys want to take a photo of it. And let's talk a little bit about the next generation here. How do I know Alex? Because Alex, his grandfather, saved my grandmother's life. My grandmother, I won't talk too much about this, her dear friend growing up was Walter Frankel, which was Viktor Frankel's brother. And Walter was killed in the concentration camp. And when they were liberated, Viktor saved my grandmother by putting her in American zone in an isolation so that she could come here. And when I found Alex, what happened is, you know, this thing called Facebook, I posted something on the Viktor Frankl site, and I said, "I have something you don't have." And what happened is that Viktor would come to my house and draw pictures during Passover. And Alex said, "Yep." And during the pandemic, Alex came from Austria to here. And while I was working on my other panel, I let him go through my papers. And what was interesting is they were some of the few papers that Viktor wrote to my grandfather, not Herr Goldschmidt, but hello, Oscar. But his grandfather was my grandmother's lifesaver. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't for your grandfather. I want to talk about Deana Babbitt. Again, where do I get my information from? I learned from Stephen Smith, we learned from Stephen Smith that when you become a Shoah interviewer, every single person that we interview, we treat them with the utmost respect, trying to get as much information as we can. Deana Babbitt might have known my mother because of being an artist and where they studied in Czechoslovakia. So Deana was known as the portrait artist, or the artist who worked with Dr. Mengele. And if you look at this, you can see Dr. Mengele was outraged that she took her time. Notice the details in her eyes. She was only supposed to match skin tones. So in my next video, Karen wanted to be up here, but I told Karen, you're going to be in here. So let's listen to Karen a little bit.
So she goes and she finds a number of people. And after a while, Mengele gets tired of her taking her time choosing people and starts grabbing them and bringing them to her. And she paints, and she paints slowly, because as long as she paints, she has a feeling they'll live. And she starts having intimate relationships. They don't speak the same language, but there's an intimacy if you're an artist, as you well know, Sandy, where she's capturing the faces of these people. And there was one in particular, a woman named Celine, a young mother whose baby had just died from lack of milk, who had a blue scarf on. And my mother was painting her slowly, but her main objective, she said, was to capture the desperation in their eyes, because that would communicate to the world what was really happening to the Roma, if she could just get the eyes desperate enough. And as she was painting Celine, Mengele came in, and he was angry that she was looking desperate and beautiful. And he grabbed the scarf on her head and shoved it behind her ears and was trying to point out the inferiority of her hairline. And so my mother was obligated to do the hairline. she was given extra rations of bread so that she could work, and she gave them to Celine to keep Celine going. And so there were 12 people all in all that my mother got to know through the intimacy of art and paintings of. And several times during this escapade, several times her life was threatened. I mean, the one day that stands out, Sandy, is the day they said they were going to put her mother into the line to be gassed. And my mother said to Mengele, if you do, I'm going to go hold on to the electrified fence. And so they didn't kill my grandmother.
So that's where I get my stories from the truth. They have to be real. If it's not real, we're doing a huge mistake. Neil Adams, how many of you have heard of Neil Adams? Yeah. So imagine that Neil Adams did a cartoon, the greatest form of flattery of Deana's story, being the artist in Auschwitz, painting the back wall with Snow White. And while the Nazis are crying because of what happened with Snow White, they're mass killing Jewish people. And again, the picture can tell 1,000 words, but as Heidi told us earlier when we were outside, tell me what portrait artist does.
In the hierarchy of types, with maybe still life being at the bottom, portraiture is at the highest of the pecking order. So Deana Babbitt was an extraordinary portrait artist. You know, if you had tools that could save your life, especially in the camps. So not only was she an expert portraiture artist, she was great with color. So she offered Mengele something that was valuable, which is why she slow played it, painted very slowly to try to keep these people alive until he was onto her.
Just so you know, real short, she married Art Babbitt, who drew Goofy. Yeah, just so you know. Yeah. Otto Olaire, my mother's teacher, and if you look really carefully, he drew what he saw. In fact, he was such an incredible artist that his fingers were chopped off. And when he ended up going to Auschwitz, he survived. So, how many want to see the inside of Viktor Frankl's house?
I think that might be remarkable. This picture has been painted in a concentration camp by a rather famous professor of arts of the Art Academy of Brno, the capital of Moravia, part of Czechoslovakia. And you see here a group of coffins that were being recycled again and again. And here you see the wall of a fortress. This concentration camp, Terezin, had been a fortress hundreds of years ago. And this was the place where, after the conversion of this fortress city into a concentration camp, better to say a milder form of a concentration camp, a ghetto, the ghetto Terezin, where the corpses were put into the coffins before the rabbi gave his berucha. And here in one of these coffins I saw the body of my dead father, and under this roof of this barrack my mother gave me her blessing when I went to Auschwitz, without knowing that 1 week later she will be sent to Auschwitz also, but in her case she was directly brought to one of the gas chambers.
Can you imagine this is who came to my house year after year with my grandfather? Pretty amazing. I wanted to show this to you because if it was a photograph, it would be a little too painful to look at, wouldn't it? So it's the artwork. And I know you're sitting here thinking, when is the guy at the end going to speak? So, Mr. David Brown, David Beck Brown, I welcome you to our panel.
Present.
Yeah, present.
Yeah, absolutely.
My name is David Beck Brown. I'm an artist, and I've taught art in the federal prison, the state prison, with the witness protection program in the county jail. So I've been around a lot of incarcerated people, and there's a sense about lifers, that there's a calmness because they've accepted their fate, whatever it is. Now,
Can I ask the question to the audience? Who painted this? Ready? Adolf Hitler.
It's a good painting, the composition, the colors. My role is truth in history. Just tell the truth. Don't disguise it. And most of my life I heard that Adolf Hitler was a failed artist. He was not a failed artist. He was a successful artist. The Allies confiscated most of his good art at the end of the war, so they would never be shown again. So what is left is his inferior art. So this particular piece I copied up after Adolf Hitler. It's in chalks and colored pencils, but then I smeared it. Like history erased. We cannot erase history. Disagree with it, disagree with it. But go change it. Now this is another unknown artist. He was a Italian artist, and he went into the caves of northern Italy, where there was a massacre. 335 Italians were shot in the back of the head in this cave, and they were left for dead. It's because Hitler ordered, because of the death of 28 Nazi SS, that 10 people had to be killed.
I'm going to run through them as you're talking, David.
Yes.
I'm going to run through them
Oh,
as
yes,
you're
yes.
talking. Okay, go ahead.
And they got 335. There were 75 Jews. There were people from prison that they just wanted to execute them. Now, this was in May of 1944, towards the end of the war. They didn't open up the caves until July, so these bodies were sitting there for 4 months. And this one artist walked in with a crew, and they exhumed the dead, most of whom were identified by their names and their families.
Who are you, David?
This is a picture of me during an art show not long ago. I made 48 portraits of people, for lack of a better term, people who I channeled, who have been incarcerated. It's like automatic writing. This is an automatic channeling. And they were worked out with the very basics. It's just gesso and chalk, because people who are incarcerated don't have that many belongings. And so this is charcoal and chalk, and I just painted one after the other after the other. I didn't think it, I didn't overthink it, I just did it.
Did they have names, David?
Oh, and each painting is named after a person in Auschwitz who was in Auschwitz, with their age and their name. But I didn't want to get a realistic view. I wanted to get an emotional view, the intensity, the expression. Now this little girl, we all know, Snow White, beautiful. She was given a gift, this red apple, and she's clutching the gift.
But, look at the word gift.
Gift gas in German means poison gas. And this is a can that was used of the Zyklon B. I bought a can, that's fairly well preserved, but it was opened with a bayonet or something. Most of the cans were punched open. The reason that they were punched open is because there was a machine. I've always heard that the poison was put through a hole in the roof of a gas chamber or through a wall. But now I found out that it was a sophisticated machine which they had to lower the Zyklon can opener. They put it in this device on the lower left and punch it out, the gas would go in, it would disperse, and then the next group would...
So you can conceptualize an idea by drawing it out before you just build it.
Yeah, it's a schematic, and this is the actual machine that was used. Now, this would not have come to light, but there was an artist in Germany right now who has a display, and he has this large billboard, which 12 feet by 11 feet, and it says Zyklon B, and there's a website. If you look on the website, it shows what manufacturers, what businesses who still work today were part of this execution. Now, because of this, it's all in German, but in 2018, the website was taken down because, because of guilt of people, corporations that are still existing. Now, the bottom painting here, it looks like the poison apple. This is the Zyklon B behind a Campbell soup can of black beans. And this is what the artist is showing today. So even though the Holocaust was 70 years ago, it's intact, it's still affecting people. And this is a cartoon that was out a few years ago, Libya and Gaddafi, Iraq, and this man is pitching Zyklon B. It's a German quality.
Thank you so much, Dave. If you're a child of a Holocaust survivor, would you mind standing up? Grandchildren? Grandchildren, too. So you see, it's up to us now. It's up to us. And with our message that we have, you have no idea how wonderful it is to be with this panel and this group. We've come a long way. I do miss Ruthie. Don't think I don't miss her. We're going to tell you kind of a funny story. All right, Alex? So what happened when somebody mailed a package to your grandfather?
Well, as you now know, the word gift means something completely different in German. And so actually my grandfather used to be in San Diego all the time from the 1970s on, and he used to teach here and he loved it. My first memories are San Diego, actually, of my life. And he used to send gifts home. And so he would put gifts in for the family, and one package went to my grandmother's mother, who was of that generation, was born in 1900, that didn't learn English in school. And so when the package arrived,
You're all laughing.
it had the word gift all over it. So when my grandparents arrived a couple of months later, the package was unopened in her apartment. I said, "Why didn't you open that?" "Well, it said gift. It says poison on it. I'm not going to open it."
So it's really fun when we have humor. Are there any questions? If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. We'd love to hear what your questions are. Yes, sir.
I believe now there's only 23 states in the U.S. that have mandatory Holocaust education. Can you comment on what is being done to try to get all the states?
Yeah, it's really terrible. Heidi and I talk about this all the time. And my comment to that is thank God for Comic-Con, because they allow us to do this. They believe in us. And there are a lot of Holocaust survivors. In fact, you're sitting next to a child of a Holocaust survivor, Roxanne Schindler. So for those of you who know Rose Schindler, this is her daughter. And what happens is that while Holocaust survivors are out speaking in schools, I try to find places where they're not. And then my goal is to get that out there. And with Shoah interviews, can you agree that once that we start doing Shoah interviews with people, and they've spoken and they've understood for the first time stuff that they've had inside of them, that they want to do it. Next week, I'm on a military base for 4 days, and I'll be speaking with a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor. We have plays that people are doing. In San Diego right now, we've got one of the greatest plays with the greatest review called Witnesses. And I could elaborate on it, but I'm telling you, don't walk, run to get tickets to see this, because it's really incredible. It's a matter of awareness. And as Heidi would say, don't be a bystander. Take it away.
I'll speak to your question. We're not a mandated state. I'm from Nevada. We're not a mandated state, but we're teaching Holocaust all the time. And then you have states that are mandated, and they're either not funded or they're taught incorrectly. I'm not all that, and I did lobby our legislature for a mandate, and now they're slow playing everything. It's now not going to be Holocaust education, it's going to be Holocaust and genocide education. You have to be very careful, because what constitutes a genocide? There are certain regimes that want to be considered in that, and then it gets political and it dilutes Holocaust education. So I'm not going to fight to the death to get it mandated in our state. I'm doing it anyway. And on the national level and in Israel and Yad Vashem, they have perfected it like a Swiss watch. There's enough education out there that if we just Google Yad Vashem and you get their teaching programs, their lessons, teachers can teach it. So I hope that answers your question.
And you have to remember, sir, that we are the ashes of the Holocaust, okay? I was given a dress that my grandmother wore in Auschwitz, for those of you who have followed me, and it became a logo. With Alex, can you imagine that you have the plethora of information, because he's your grandfather, but think about two people who are on the panel who want to do this because they care. And that is really to be applauded, so I'll be the first on that one, guys. Do you have any other questions? Yes, over here.
Do you have any art books that you recommend from this era? Just seeing this from looking at the stage, I've never heard of art.
You know, when I think about art books, I can't. Lily Renee, who's one of our first ones, who is a female, and I think she's 100 or 101 now, and what she did with Trina Robbins, oh my God, Trina, what Trina has brought to the forefront, I believe the mouse needs to be read. It must be read. And I just think that with everything that we do, there are a lot of films, documentaries. I'm going to pass the mic down and see if there's anybody who would you recommend, Alex?
What was the question?
Recommendations for books.
Books and art.
Art books or Holocaust books. I actually like Draw What They Saw. That one I love. Yeah.
That's a comic book.
No. That's what came out. Yeah, what Helga wrote.
You want art to teach art? I think art books on Theresienstadt.
Yeah.
They had limited access to supplies. You have to do it clandestinely. You'll notice the type of art that's created during a camp as opposed to, let's say, a death camp. A work camp or a ghetto is different than what's created in a death camp. Time, right? Nutrition, all kinds of things, constraints. Get a book on Theresienstadt, I think.
Yeah, there's one in particular that I absolutely, it's not a book, but when I'm on YouTube, there's this guy by the name of Viktor Frankl, and when I look at his drawings on YouTube, and I see if you weren't here, I would have done this, let me tell you. He really is a mentor because of the fact that there's a meaning behind it. So I think that by Googling and picking and choosing, do I make the recommendation in Helga's book, which is, they drew what they saw. That's important, yeah.
And also ushmn.org, and go to the link called Teach, and there will be on any subject you want. It's a gold mine, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Go to the rock stars in the field. Go right there. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
On that subject,
And then you're next after him, okay.
The artist David Olaire,
Uh-huh.
who was a Sonderkommando survivor, he drew art because there was no pictures of the crematoriums or anything, it was all destroyed. So it was very historical value of his art. I don't know if you would comment on his art.
Sure. Heidi, take it away.
There was a picture of David Olaire, the way he captured the eyes and the gaunt sides of the face, and he drew it in very harsh colors. Do you know what I'm talking about? And there's a picture of him collecting bread that people would throw over the gate, and it's called Canada. They would confiscate your luggage. You were sent to Auschwitz with a suitcase. You thought you were being relocated. He captured a lot of pictures with the luggage and pulling food out to share. David Olaire is amazing.
You know, we have to wrap it up. We're going to do one quick stand-up so you can take who we are. My next panel is at 3:30. I'll be doing movement inside the cosplay costume. It's been wonderful to see you. That's over in room 29, so let's stand up if you can.